If you've ever struggled with setting and maintaining boundaries at work, then this video is for you. Hi, I'm Rachel, and I help women put plans and strategies in place to build and scale their businesses whilst they work their 9 to 5. So when we think about boundaries at work, it's also important to know that those same issues are felt in various relationships, and the skills you get today can help in all of those as well. But we speak a lot about boundaries because it is literally your last line of defense. And when you don't set or maintain those boundaries, we all know what the effects are. Not maintaining your boundaries at work means that you can become overwhelmed. As resources dwindle and your tasks are ever increasing, it can give you that feeling that you're being taken advantage of. You can become overwhelmed and you can experience burnout. Sometimes it feels like the more you do and the more accommodating you are, the more helpful you are, and you sometimes don't look at it as a pushing of your boundaries, but it means that when you have that nature, then more gets put onto you. It reminds me of a time when I was asked to cover a meeting and I thought, yeah, I've got a spare hour in the day, and I did, although I could have used that time for myself to prep for another meeting. And what happened was that I covered for this meeting and I was left with the actions that went on for weeks. And if you don't set your boundaries properly and you're feeling overwhelmed at work, then what happens? That work spills over into the home. You could find yourself coming home in the evenings and logging on late into the night. And then what happens? It's literally like a domino effect. If you live with other people, your partner, your spouse, your children, you might start feeling guilty about taking that work home and not spending the time and doing the things that you want to do as a family. That guilt can come on whether they say anything or not. And then if you're taking the time, doing the 9 to 5 at home after 5, then what happens to your business? That suffers. And usually the other thing that suffers as well is your self-care. And then you find yourself in a whole guilt cycle. Overwhelming tasks in the office, springing out and coming into the home, feeling guilty about not spending the time with your family or spending time in your business, not having time for yourself, not having free time to relax, to rejuvenate and reset. And you find yourself in that vicious cycle. And this can be so true when you're trying to be all things to all people. But it's really important to break down why we don't always set boundaries at work. And the main one is literally fear. And there is a legitimate fear of management. You are under employment. You are going to be held accountable. You are being given instructions or tasks, and they are expected to be done. And if they're not done, you could be in a whole world of trouble. You could find yourself in a disciplinary. These are legitimate concerns in the world of employment. Another reason why we don't always set those boundaries at work is it can just be the work culture. As much as workplaces will preach, have a work-life balance and staff welfare, the expectation for many places is that the work just needs to get done. And it doesn't matter how it's done, it just needs to get done. We have targets to meet. And there could be a work culture of, if you go sick, you're seen as weak, you're seen as not pulling your weight, and reputation at work matters. Nobody wants to be seen as the shirker. You also don't want the spotlight on you. And if it's known that you're building a business outside of work, it's kind of impossible for that spotlight not to be on you. There will be this automatic assumption that if you have interests outside of work, that you have a division of focus and you may not be putting as much emphasis and focus onto your 9 to 5. And so sometimes the boundaries get pushed because you just want to avoid the drama of being seen as not doing as much as anyone else. Or as I said, the culture of the workplace may be that it just needs to get done and everybody has to pull their weight. And yes, you have to pull your weight, but not at the expense of what's reasonable. So you have the 9 to 5 and you are building your business. And this is where you do have to start prioritizing what can you manage and what's important to you. You do have to look at what your goals are. And if you need help putting those goals into a workable state, then I've created a free workbook. It's called the Goal Getter Generator, and you can download it in the description underneath this video. That workbook will help you to break down your goals into manageable steps, and it also contains tips and strategies to help you maintain your focus. And it only costs 2 things: a click at the bottom so that you can receive it, and your decision to put yourself first. So download it and get started. And when you have your goals and the steps that you need to take to get to them, where your boundaries need to be become a lot clearer, because you'll be able to see the things that are important to you in terms of what you need to be doing and the things that are taking you away from your focus. And when we think about boundaries, think of a fence. A fence is a boundary. And if you have a fence, when was the last time that you just randomly went and just leaned up against your fence? I kind of bet that you don't do that on a daily basis. If you've got a fence around your house, it's at the mercy of everything else that's usually on the other side of that fence, not what's within it. That's your protection. But it's at the mercy of the weather. The wind will be blowing against it. The rain will be pelting down on it. You might have animals climbing over it. You might have people climbing over it. You might have trees falling on it. And even if all of that hasn't happened, over time, you might still see a panel coming loose. There's a screw that needs to be put back on, because over time, boundaries, fences, always need to be reinforced. And when you remember that a boundary, a fence, is really touched by the person that it belongs to, it's usually only outside forces. And whose responsibility is it to maintain that fence? The person who owns it, you. So how do we maintain that fence? Sorry, I meant boundary, when we've got all these elements that are pushing against it and trying to get through. So first of all, we have to learn how to say no. And there's many different ways to say no. It might mean that there's a conversation that needs to be had where you outline what's in your job description and what you know is expected of you, so that those boundaries are very clear. And if you need help with having one of those difficult conversations, check out my previous video on holding difficult conversations. But you have to be very aware of what's within your scope. Plan out your diary so that you know whether or not you have the space or not. So for example, when I took on that meeting, yes, I had a free hour, but I actually needed that time for myself. And if I was thinking ahead of the repercussions of that, I wouldn't have taken it on, because it left me with weeks of chasing up actions that had absolutely nothing to do with me. Asking questions and clarifying stuff that the other person could have done because they knew the background. I didn't. Trust me, I learned from that experience. That is never happening again. And saying no is not just saying no to, I don't want this extra task. It's looking at, if you're being asked to do something, is it actually in alignment with your workflow? Sometimes you get pulled into so many different things, but if you have a clear idea of what is within your scope, what you need to be doing, then it's easier to say no, because no, I don't need to be involved in this because this doesn't align with what I'm doing, or this isn't part of my work stream, or I'd love to help, but I really do not have the capacity to do this right now. The second way to maintain your boundaries is to make sure that you're prioritizing what's important to you and using good time management techniques. It could be things like using the Pomodoro technique, time blocking, but always make sure that your diary is up to date and you have a plan of what your quarter, your month, your week, and your day looks like. And my last video was on how to plan your quarter, so that might also help. But we need to be very aware of how we're spending our time. One of the things that happens and leads to us being overwhelmed is we don't always understand how much time it actually takes to do a task. And this hit me just yesterday, where I went into a document to make a couple of quick amendments. In my head, I thought, quick half an hour. 2 hours later, I was still there. So the more aware we are on what we have to do and planning out our time and actually looking at how much time does it take to do particular tasks, will put us in a better position to know how much time we actually have in our day and how much we can waste or give to someone else. And when it comes to prioritizing what's important, we also have to look at which tasks are actually overwhelming for us, because there may be some tasks that are literally draining. So it's looking at what space do I put myself in order to do those tasks? Who do I need to tell? Who do I need to go to for help? What can I delegate? And again, go back to what do I need to say no to? And then number 3, when it comes to maintaining boundaries, sometimes we actually do need a physical boundary. So in order to be left alone, there may be some tasks that we have to do in specific places. Maybe we have an area that we can go to, a designated workspace, that when we're there, people know that that's our time to be left alone. There are some offices that might have spaces that are like concentration booths. I used to put a note on my door, and I was generous enough to put on there when I'd be free. So I may say something like, please do not disturb until 2 p.m. You're also showing people where your boundaries are. That way they get to respect your time, and you get to give yourself the respect and focus on the task at hand. And the fourth way of maintaining your boundaries is literally just to maintain yourself. Self-care is so important. When you're prioritizing and doing your time management and planning, you have to plan in time for yourself. In the same way that if you've got a fence around your house, there'll be times when you go around and you check it and, oh yeah, this needs, a little bit of shoring up here, or I think it needs some weather guard on it, and you go out there and paint that fence. The same way that you would take the time to maintain your fence, you have to take the time to maintain yourself. Are you taking your lunches? Are you working through your lunches? Are you going home on time? Are you continually taking work home? If you work from home, are you working longer hours? Because that's one of the things that people don't understand. And I know they think that, and I've had that said to me, oh yeah, lucky for you, you're working from home. No, many times you end up working longer hours because you can start earlier and leave late. You don't have a commute. The time that it takes to get up and get in the car or on the train to go somewhere else, if you're working from home, you're already working. And we do know that if you're sitting in the office, there are some people that will just work all the way through lunch. Have you been to lunch yet? No. I just need to get this done. The same thing happens at home. You can log on at after 8 in the morning, and by the time you turn around, it's 5 o'clock and you have not eaten, have not drunk, have not done anything. Meeting after meeting, report after report, longer hours than if you were in there. So self-care is important. Self-care takes in all of that as well. And then the fifth way, I like my R words, you have to review and you have to reflect. That's the only way that you can maintain your boundaries. You have to look at what is serving you right now, what has served you, what has worked, and what do you need going forward. Maybe a way that you were working before, but things have changed, and so you need to readjust how you're working. Do not be afraid to make those much needed adjustments to your schedule. And remember that your goals are yours. They're not anyone else's. No one else has to understand why you're in a 9-to-5 and running a business. It's not their dream. It's not their goal. It's not a journey that was given to them. It's yours. So do the things that serve you. Prioritize what works for you. And when it comes to boundaries, one of the things that we really need to remember, I think a lot of the times we put the onus on other people. The boundary is us. We've put the boundary up. Again, if you go back to a fence that's around your house, you wouldn't need one if no one was ever going to trespass. But you need it because you want your privacy. You need it because you want your space. You're the one whose job it is to maintain it. And sometimes we need to stop focusing on who is it that's continually jumping the fence, and just make sure, do the things you need to do to keep that fence, your boundaries, secured, because there will always be external forces. But again, the only person whose job it is to maintain those boundaries is yours. So let me know which of those tips you find useful in terms of maintaining your boundaries, or which ones you struggle with. Until the next video, bye.